Hello, welcome. This is a series of videos that I'm going to be making on folklore of trees and plants of Northern Europe. And what a better place to begin than with this girl here. This is the birch tree, otherwise known as the Lady of the Wood, or the goddess of the trees, or the mother of all the trees. And this is a tree of new beginnings, fresh starts, of clearing out the old and bringing in the new. It's also, incidentally, the very, very first letter in the Druidic or Celtic tree alphabet known as Ogham. So this is an Ogham stave here. It's carved out of a bit of birch, not from this tree, I think from one of them over there. I asked it first, very polite to do that. And I marked this this symbol in, which is just a little symbol which stands for Be in the Irish language, or birch tree. The tree also is represented in the Germanic runic script, and in Anglo-saxon runes this is known as Björk. I think it's called Berkano in the Elder Fuduk. But it means sort of the same thing in both scripts, in both sets of symbology, because I sometimes think Germanic and Celtic is more closely related than people like to believe sometimes. Anyway, that's a side issue. This tree means rebirth, fresh starts, like I already said, new beginnings, good luck on a new journey, a new venture, also healing and protection and cleansing. And there's all sorts of reasons for this. It is a very cleansing tree. It has a lot of very positive qualities. The birch sap is very, very healing. It clears you out. A lot of the fungi associated with this tree, like this guy, the birch polypore, you can make this into a tea, and it has very curative properties. I think they found this in the pocket of the Iceman that they found in the Alps. You know, millennia old man they found with a bit of birch, dry birch in his pocket, and they found out that he suffered from worms, I think, and that's one of the things it cures. Just flushes your body out, or that kind of thing. The reason why this is a tree of new beginnings, and also why it's sometimes called the mother of trees, despite actually being quite a short-lived tree. It only lives about the length of a human lifespan, 70 or 80 years. Quite not very long for a tree. It makes it a lot more human and relatable, I think. But this is the very first tree that colonizes new ground. It was probably the very first tree in this country after the last ice age, because it's very hardy, colonizes new ground, and then provides shelter and nutrients in the form of its rotten body that then supplies other trees. Other fungi that this tree has an association with is the fly agaric mushroom, which I don't have any of here, but that classic fairy mushroom that normally grows at the base of birch trees. And again, that could be one of the reasons why the birch tree has associations with magic and journeying, specifically going on a soul journey with the fly agaric mushroom. You can also make canoes out of the bark, not in this country, but in Canada and places like that where the bark is tougher, they make canoes to go on journeys. The birch tree is also used in magic, and we'll see a bit of this in the story I'm about to tell you, but you can make a besom broom out of birch twigs, and with that you can clear the energy in a space, or that's what it's often used for, much like you might burn sage or do some other kind of cleansing. You can also just make a sort of switch or a stave with it and strike things to kind of clean the energy out. That's what it's traditionally been used for, and possibly because it's such a cleansing tree, you know, associated with clearing out the body. Maybe that's why it has that association in magic. I don't know, but I've always found that very, very interesting. Very important tree. Very important tree in magic. So I suppose, if any of you are looking for a fresh start in your life, looking to just clear out mental habits and patterns that aren't really serving you, birch is a good tree to spend some time with. Long ago, there was a man and a woman who lived alone on the edge of a forest a birch forest. Now this husband and wife had one young daughter and just a few sheep. They were very, very poor. One day, one of the sheep, a black sheep, went missing, and the man and his wife went looking in the birch forest for the lost sheep. Now, the woman, she went deeper and deeper into a thicket when, emerging out of a tangled mass of old dead birch trees, was a haggard old witch, her skin blistering like the bark of a birch tree. And this woman, this witch, seized the peasant woman on the wrist. The woman tried to pull away in fear, but she couldn't. And as she looked into the old witch's eyes, the witch began to change and transform and became a mirror image of that peasant woman herself, a doppelganger, transformed by magic. And as she saw this, saw her own reflection looking back at her, she felt herself begin to change into a sheep, the very black sheep they were hunting for. Then the witch, who had assumed the peasant woman's form, cried out to the peasant woman's husband, "I've got it! I found the sheep, I have!" And she held that peasant's wife, now in the shape of a sheep. Well, the husband was overjoyed, and they got that sheep home, and then that witch, transformed, said to the husband, "This sheep is nothing but trouble. We need to have it put down, and we'll eat it." The husband was a very meek sort of man, but agreed. But the young daughter recognised something was off about her mother, and she protested and said, No, don't kill the sheep, please." "Quiet, girl," said the mother. The husband was a bit taken aback. His wife never normally spoke to their young daughter like this. But, he put it down to the stress and strain of losing the sheep. That night, in a dream, the girl's mother came to her and said, "I am the sheep, and they will kill me. But what you need to do is not eat any of my flesh and not drink any of my gruel, and you need to gather up my bones and you need to bury them at the bottom of the garden at the edge of the birch forest." Well, the girl was very, very sad, but she did as her mum commanded. And the next day, the witch, she killed the girl's mother in the shape of a form and cooked her up and made a nice soup. And the dad, he just gobbled up the soup. He loved it. He loved eating that soup. But the girl, she just cried and cried and cried, and she wouldn't touch a single thing. And her mother, who was really a witch, scolded her, but still she didn't eat a tiny little morsel of her dead mum in sheep soup form. But she gathered up all the bones in a little handkerchief, and just as her dream mum had told her, she buried them at the bottom of the garden. And she wept, and her tears just watered the soil. Now, over time, great length of time, a little birch tree sprung up on her mother's grave. And more time passed, and that witch gave her father 2 more daughters, and they were hideous little things and really nasty, and they grew up to be right spoilt little selfish brats. And to make matters worse, that girl's father died, leaving her alone with her stepmother, the evil witch, and her 2 stepsisters that were really mean to her. And then, if things were bad before, they got even worse now, because that girl was practically made into a slave. These were the times when slaves, they were around. And she had to do everything, all the chores around the house, and if she didn't do what she was told, she was beaten, and she had to go and look after her 2 ugly sisters. But she had a refuge. She would always go out to that birch tree that was growing bigger and bigger and bigger now, and she would sort of talk to it and just communicate with the spirit of her mum that was passed. Now, one day, a proclamation rang through the kingdom. This always happens in fairy tales. There's always a call from beyond, from the royal palace this time. The king's son was getting married, and all eligible females in the kingdom must line up to potentially present themselves before the young prince and maybe be his wife and future queen. So the old witch, she was overjoyed at this and pushed her 2 young daughters towards the royal palace. And the birch child, the birch maiden, she uncharacteristically piped up and said, "Can I go to the ball?" "Shut up! No, of course you can't, you stupid girl! In fact, what you're going to have to do is..." And the witch picked up a handful of barley and chucked it into the ashes, chucked it into the cinders, which incidentally is where the girl had to live. She had to live behind the ashes, behind the hearth, bit like Cinderella. See the link here. And the witch said, "Pick them up! You need to pick up every single grain of barley from those ashes, and then you can come to the ball," knowing that she wouldn't. "And if you don't do it, by the time we get back, and if you haven't done it, I'll kill you and eat you." "Don't think I won't, because I will." Well, the girl was very, very afraid, and she didn't know what to do. She knew she couldn't pick all this barley out of the ashes in time. So she went to her mother, the birch tree, and cried and cried and cried. And the birch tree spoke to her in the voice of her mother, in a vision or in a dream, I don't know, and said, "Take a branch from me. Take one. Go on, cut a branch from me, this one here, and take some twigs and make a broom, and I want you to strike the hearth and then sweep it out like this, and everything will be sorted, and then come back to me." So the girl did as she was told by her mother, the birch tree, and she struck the hearth 3 times and swept the ashes, and all the grains of barley just leapt out into a pot to be gathered, just like magic, because it was. Then she went to her mother, the tree, and her mother said this: "I want you to wash on one side of me and dry yourself on another, and then strike my trunk 3 times with a stick." Magic. So she did as she was told. She washed herself on one side, she dried herself on another, then she went around the other side and beat the trunk 3 times with a stick, and she was transformed into the most exquisite beauty imaginable. And then she looked up, and in the branches there were all these wonderful clothes, a nice scarf, some slippers, some, a nice hat. It was really nice. And all these things just fell on her, and then this wonderful golden horse came trotting out of the birch forest, and she rode it and rode off to the palace, and everyone was amazed by her beauty. And the king's son, his head really turned, and he was like, "Who is that girl?" And I was like, "I don't know." And the witch was like, "She looks kind of familiar." Her daughters obviously were not very popular, because they were proper rotters, not just, physically unattractive, but just really bad-mannered and just really just not very nice. And the prince was not interested in them in the slightest, but he was interested in this new maiden. And as the story goes, she obviously, left something on the table, her ring. So the prince gathered it up, but then she just hurried away. She didn't want to be discovered by her stepmother. She hurried away back to the birch tree, and her clothes just disappeared back into the branches, and she put on her, shitty, sort of sack, and crept back into her ashy hole where she had to live. Anyway, this happens again and again. Obviously, rule of 3, it's a fairy tale. The prince holds another banquet, and another. And the same thing happens again. The witch throws in a bunch of hemp seeds, and she has to sort those out. But she does a little birch magic. She does a little widdershins around the tree and is all dressed and goes off to the ball again. This time she leaves, her shawl, at the king's table. So the prince has something to remember her by. Next time, it's a pair of golden slippers. So the prince has these things, but every time this beautiful, birch maiden had just slipped out of the palace and out of his grasp. But he had these things, and obviously you know how this part of the story goes. "Whoever these slippers fit, will be my queen." And the witch, she's pushing her daughters forward, and she's chopping bits off their feet to squeeze the slippers in. She's shaving bits off their fingers to put the ring on. She's cutting her ears off to fit the scarf or whatever. But it still doesn't work. But it fits the young girl, obviously. So she rides home to the palace and is made queen. But so far, so Cinderella, right? But there's another bit at the end of this that really belies some of the sort of like magical folkloric elements preserved in this story. One, obviously, is the cleansing birch branch and the sort of birch magic and the maternal aspects of the birch tree and the cleansing aspects. But there's another bit. So, happily ever after. But there's an appendix. Appendix? Appendix. Let's say appendix. The witch is not quite through yet, and she realizes what's gone on. So she goes into the king's bedchamber. Now, her stepdaughter by this time has borne the prince a beautiful young daughter. But the queen, the witch, steals into the new queen's bedchamber and transforms her into a reindeer. And she flees into the forest. And then she transforms herself, same old trick as the beginning of the story, into her beautiful form. Now the prince comes back and he gets something's wrong. Magic is not happening in the bedroom, and he also notices that the baby isn't bonding with its mother, and he knows something's up. So in the night, he takes the child to a cunning woman, a wise woman, a kind of a good kind of witch that lives somewhere in the forest, and says something's up. And this woman knows, and she says, "Your queen is not your queen. Your queen is actually a reindeer now living in the forest. You cannot take that child back, because who you think is your queen is actually a shapeshifter in disguise." "Well, what do I do?" says the prince. "Come with me. I will take you to where your wife is." And they take the baby and they just lay her at the foot of a birch tree. And they go into a quiet place and watch for a long time and wait. And then a reindeer leaves the herd and comes up and just tends to this baby, just licks it on the head, gives it some milk, I don't know. 3 more nights. The prince does this with the old wise woman of the forest. And eventually he says to this cunning woman, "Is there not a way to change my wife back from a reindeer?" And she says, "There is a way. There is a way." And this is where this gets really interesting. What you're gonna do is you're going to approach the reindeer very, very gently next time she's tending her son. Just very gently. Just say that it's you. And you're gonna wait till she takes off her reindeer skin, and then I will comb her hair, your wife's hair, and when she's distracted, you burn the reindeer skin. So that's what they did. They laid the child down at the foot of the birch tree again. The reindeer wife comes up and starts tending to that little child, and the king just approaches it very, very cautiously. And the reindeer takes off her skin and he sees his wife, but she doesn't quite recognize him. She's still timid. And then the wise woman approaches and starts just combing her hair, just like that, combing her hair. And meanwhile, the king burns the reindeer skin. And the queen, very, very afraid now, goes, like, "What am I going to do? The witch will eat me if I go back. I'm naked." And she changes herself into various other things made of wood. She changes herself into a basket, and the prince burns that. And then she changes herself into a sewing wheel, and he burns that. She changes herself into a rocking horse, a wooden beetle, a stick, a broomstick, I don't know, like a hat made of wood, anything, a canoe, all these different things. Jing, 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 jing. She starts changing into, and he just patiently burns them one after the other, getting rid of the old, bringing in the new. Eventually she runs out of forms to change into, and she's standing there exhausted, naked, sobbing, and he takes her in his arms. And then they go back to the palace. The witch has run away with her ugly daughters, and they never see her again. And now it's a happy ending. And I just love that preserved in that there's this energy of renewal, of changing shape again, and also the sort of aspects of folk magic to do with birch trees, with their cleansing and purifying space. So that is the story of the wonderful birch. Thank you very much.